Okay, well, my name is Paul Gorry. I'm the chairman of the West Wicklow Historical Society. We have a very busy schedule. I didn't realise that the time had gone over, so I'm not going to detain you very long. First of all, I just remind you that you might turn your mobile phones to silent or to off or to flight mode. It'd be a bit distracting to the speakers to have them going off. I'd just like to welcome you all to the event. We're delighted with the turnout. We didn't know, because we had people booking in advance, but we didn't know how many people might turn up on the day. So we're very pleased, and we've just enough seats put out for you. This event is in honour of Donald MacDonald, our friend and colleague, who sustained the Society for the last 40 years plus. He was a member from 1980 when we were founded, and he was on our first committee. He was on the committee ever since, but he was an officer for 40 years. I'd like to welcome Donald's sister Maura and her friends. I'd also like to welcome, well, two of our three honorary members, Peadar Cullen and Phyllis Flanagan. Peadar Cullen and Phyllis Flanagan. PJ Hanlon is our other honorary member, and I'm hoping that he'll be here later in the day. I want to thank all of our lecturers. They all knew Donald, and when I contacted them about speaking at this, without any hesitation, they all agreed. So it's a mark of respect to Donald. I'd also like to remember another of our stalwarts, Noel Lyons, who was also a past chairman. And we lost Noel also in the last year. But I'm delighted that Emma, his daughter, is one of our speakers. The Lyons family she's third generation involved with the Historical Society now, Emma. And I'm delighted to see that Noel's wife, Kate, is here today, and his brother-in-law, Felix, will be here later on. The opening address is by Monsignor John McAvoy, a friend of the MacDonald family. He's also PP of Rathvilly Parish, which spills into West Wicklow. He's also a noted ecclesiastical historian, and I have on my bookshelf, and I use it quite a lot, his 1993 publication, Carlow College 1793 to 1993, which is a compilation of the details of ordained students and teaching staff of St Patrick's College in Carlow. So I'm not going to say any more. I'm going to pass you over to Monsignor McAvoy, who is giving us the opening address.
I'm very honoured to be invited to make these opening remarks, as I had the pleasure of knowing Donald over a number of years, and I was aware of his family going back to my secondary school days, where I attended Knockbeg, all a boarding school at that time. His younger brother, Tom, was in a class just two ahead of me, so when I was doing my inter, he was doing his leaving. That'll give you kind of an idea. Both of us then moved on to Maynooth straight after leaving cert. Tom being ordained then 2 years ahead of myself in the mid-70s. So I was Father Tom's colleague then on the staff in the college, and the two of us had a fairly deep involvement in the arrangements marking the bicentenary 200 years of the college in 93. I produced that compilation that was referred to already, while Tom did a very remarkable exhibition on the history of the college, which was open for many months that year, and a lot of people came to see. And I think a tape was made, which was meant to be an ongoing recording of it, but not sure if we know how to show it anymore with the way technology has changed. But it could probably be put onto a CD. Tom himself showed huge aptitude for research, and his interests in church history and buildings and artwork and everything like that were very prominent. He published a good few articles on those kind of subjects in the college magazine, the Carlovian, which are well worth consulting as well. Did one on all the portraits in the college, and he did another one basically on how the buildings of the college grew and developed over the years, well documented. And so I got to know Donald through Tom over a number of years, but particularly in a better way, maybe in the last 10 years or so, since Father Tom's illness and death, and then being in touch with him each year after that. I was, at the time of his death, working in Paulstown Parish, where Father Tom had spent some years earlier as a parish priest before going to Sallins. And so Donal and Maura and other friends used to congregate on Tom's anniversary, a Mass that I had the honour of celebrating annually, and that tradition continued in Rathvilly when I was transferred there. So the chats I used to have with Donal were mostly in those final 10 years, and his interests ran very deeply and very widely. I know he was also a farmer, but he managed to keep the farm ticking over as well, but seemed to devote a great amount of his time to his historical interests. So I remember meeting him, for example, in Talbotstown Church, where he was attending the annual Mass arranged to remember all the people buried in the Kilranella Cemetery, which has a history going back to the first Christian millennium, and ancestors of the MacDonalds are interred there in Kilranella. And there's lots of interesting old details of historical value. A small Celtic cross there, for example, was chosen by Father Tom's family to put on his memory card. That's in Kilranella. Over the past few years, Donal shared with me some back issues of the journal, as well as the publication on General O'Brien. I see they're all on sale out there. Another memory that stands out was his giving a guided tour of Baltinglass Abbey to a group of the Carlow Historical and Archaeological Society members. And when they were on a historical tour, which concentrated on the region, Castledermot, Kilkee, Moon and Baltinglass, the explanations that Donal gave and his confidently dealing with questions showed the pride that he took in the Abbey, as well as his wide-ranging knowledge of the locality and its history. He showed clearly how satisfying he found the work involved with the Historical Society, and was prepared to devote so much of his time to it, being an officer, as we were told, for so long, and co-editor along with Chris Lawler over a number of years. So I'd like to compliment the committee of the Society in organising today's conference, a very fitting way to honour Donal, who himself was so passionate about promoting the aims of the Society, and I look forward, as you all do, to hearing the various lectures which are in the programme. So I don't think I'll delay you any longer, but I could have if I had said everything that I had on these pages. But thank you very much, and I'm very honoured.
This morning I'm going to present very briefly some results of our excavations at Rathcorn, and my apologies if I fly through some of these slides, but you know there's a lot to get through, so if you have any questions, I'll be around. So Rathcorn is one of a cluster of 9 hill forts and hilltop enclosures located close to the town here in Baltinglass. The hill forts overlook the town and the Slaney River on the highest point of a series of prominent hills off the southwestern part of the Wicklow Mountains.
Alan, thanks very much for being here and agreeing to give the presentation. You knew Donal, of course, from Baltic Glass Hill.
I did, yeah. I first met Donal, myself and James O'Driscoll, we were students at the time, we were postgraduate students. And we were up working for the university at the time to do some surveys. So we were trying to figure out who owned the land. So luckily for us, we happened upon Donal's house by chance. It's about 10 years ago, I'd say now, 2012, and yeah, we knocked on the right door for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
Donal is, he knew a lot about the landscape, a lot about the history of the area, which we didn't know about. We were coming from Cork. So he gave us all the local lore of the site, and which we wouldn't know of otherwise. So, and over the last, I suppose, 10 years, getting to know Donal, he was really pivotal in our project. He was really another team member. I said that before.
Yeah.
Every year that we arrived there was always a new nugget of information which we didn't know about.
Yeah. Well, he took huge interest in it anyway. He was delighted to be able to, to be there with you and that sort of thing.
Yes.
So yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And he did. Like every time we were there, he was up every few days to kind of, get a summary of what's happening and how we're getting on. I don't think he was too pleased when we kind of ventured over to another landowner's side of the Hillfort. I think he wanted us to kind of stay on his side. Unfortunately, the results on his side weren't too, I suppose, interesting. But, he was still interested in the whole project. And another thing too, Donal was very interested not just in the Hillfort, but the archaeology of the wider landscape.
Yeah.
And he recorded a lot of unrecorded archaeology, and he should be acknowledged for that, And those sites now are protected because Donal brought attention to them, brought attention to me, and I got and myself and Robert Hambidge got those sites recorded and they're now registered monuments. So,
brilliant. I didn't know that.
Yes, absolutely. And a really well-known site, the Cursus Monuments up at Cadeen, he's the one who first brought attention to the archaeologists. It's Donal. He's not acknowledged for that, and he had a very, very keen eye for archaeology and the landscape. And he'd be sorely missed.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, anyway, it's great that we can remember him on the day, and lovely to have you here.
No problem at all.
Thanks very much, Alan. Thank you.
Now, today I want to introduce you to two writers and poets who both had a connection to Baltinglass and the wider area in the early 20th century. And hopefully now that I'm not being too presumptive when I say introduce, as some of you, may have known about one or other of them already, obviously there's a certain amount of information out there on the internet, and I will be including some of that, but hopefully I will be able to add some more details and perhaps a bit of local colour as well. One individual spent most of his working life in the West Wicklow area, while the other was only here in Baltinglass for a few short years.
Well, Bosco, I am delighted you were able to be one of our speakers today, and it's an interesting topic that you've chosen. To pretty much unknown people for Baltinglass, yeah.
Exactly, and we don't have too many poets around here, or indeed in West Wicklow, so we put a bit of a claim on them anyway.
Indeed, yeah.
And
well, they both lived in Baltinglass, isn't that right?
One most of his life, and one for a short time.
Right.
So they coexisted for a short time, but it'll just be interesting, something different.
Yeah. So, well, we wanted this for Donal, and it's wonderful to hear all the chatter going on in the other room.
Absolutely, yes.
So, yeah, it's lovely.
And well, I'm hoping I'll be able to give a shout out to Donal anyway as well, and to maybe show a little bit of a link that might have been there between a member of Donal's family and the two.
Oh, that'd be interesting.
So we'll finish up on that point, just
all right. Very good.
Should be good. It's a great turnout. I'm amazed. People are coming from all over. Castledermot, Kilkenny, Athy, and all that. It's great.
Yeah. It's lovely to see. Yeah. It's a tribute to him as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks very much, Bosco.
Okay, Paul.
Thank you.
Welcome.
It is lovely to speak to the West Wicklow Historical Society again, and as Paul mentioned earlier on, there is actually quite a long family tradition with the Lyons family and the West Wicklow Historical Society, which makes it that much more special for me to be here speaking to you today. Now, given the topic of my talk today, looking at horse racing in the 18th century, it's also fitting that this is the weekend.
Fantastic turnout and really great to be here.
Yeah.
You know the links with my family and my dad.
Yes.
And the History Society, and to be able to come here, speak to people I know on a topic I know, and to speak to the society again is fantastic.
Yes.
That's
And
right.
of course, your dad was a long-term member, and you know he's remembered today as well.
Yeah, no, it is. It's
Yeah.
I mean, very special for me to be here. Yeah.
And you've got a very interesting topic, Bolton
Yeah.
Glass Racecourse and all
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
and I think for me it's really fantastic to have a topic that, one, it's local, and somewhere I grew up as a child, but also to combine my interests with racing.
Yeah.
So it really does. It's like being in a playground and looking at all the sources, learning what we can find, and also just having fun at the same time. That it's not work.
That's
And
great.
yeah, and we've
Yeah.
learned lots more about racing in the 18th century and the developments
Alright.
of bolting glass, because very little has been done on it. As I'll mention in the paper, not that much work has been done on racing in the 18th century, partly because of the sources or the lack thereof. They're very scattered, so it was
So
a
you're
great
the right
topic.
person for that.
Yeah, with my bias, I'll say that. Yeah.
So anyway, this is a great turnout for Donal and
Absolutely.
and for the society just to be
Yeah.
back on its feet again.
Yeah, no,
So-
it is. I mean, after 2 years of lockdown,
Yeah.
you can get the sense and the atmosphere that people are excited and delighted to be able to back to some sense of normality
Yeah.
at an event. I mean, after 2 years of lockdown,
Yeah.
you can get the sense and the atmosphere that people are excited and delighted to be able to back to some sense of normality at an event they're enjoying, and and the fact that it's in memory of Donal, one of the members of the society for so long, editor of the journal, I think adds that little bit of extra atmosphere that
Yeah.
maybe you miss at normal conferences, if we call them
Yeah,
normal.
or even lectures. You don't
Yeah.
get that all that chatter that's going on in there over coffee. So
Which is fantastic.
Okay, well, I look forward to the rest of the day and to
Brilliant.
hearing your talk. Thanks very much, Evan.
Thanks, Paul.
The question was essentially asking was that would the burning, the charcoal itself, make that reading in a geophysical survey? Essentially, it would, but I think the main element here was the high degree of burning of the actual bank itself, which kind of gave that reading. The soil was highly oxidized, which means there was intense burning. And it's that was making the main reading, not the individual posts itself. They wouldn't really show up because they're quite small. They wouldn't really show up in a survey like that unless it was really extensive amount of burning. I think the main component there was the actual bank itself was extremely burnt. The soil was red in colour, and that gave the reading. Yeah.
Thanks, Ellen. There was another question over there. Somebody had their hand up. Oh, for the question to be repeated. Yes.
Yeah.
Have you identified Mr. D?
Has Bosco identified Mr. D?
No, I haven't identified Mr. D. I haven't even tried yet.
Any other questions?
And I haven't identified the S Mac L in the other one either.
Yes.
Good afternoon, Emma. How are you?
It's Jimmy.
You mentioned Donerail, Waterville point to point in 1785 or 7, whatever it was, at Blake and O'Callaghan. Would that be a significant development in steeplechasing in Emma?
Would you just repeat that?
Yeah, so can you hear me okay? So just talking about, as we all know, the Buttevant to Doneraile challenge race that occurred in this, I think it was the 1750s. That was the first steeplechase. That is kind of what we got, steeplechase. The race meetings that I was talking about today would have been much more, they were flat racing in fields, but that was, the Buttevant to Doneraile was the first recorded point-to-point and is the precursor to steeplechasing now. And it was, I think, until, I'm probably corrected, I think it was the 60s, 50s, 60s, that point-to-points were still run over banks courses rather than what we know is now the bush fences. And yeah, all race steeplechases would have been over natural country rather than the steeplechase. And then, yeah, I think from the 1750s on, there was a lot more interest in steeplechasing. And I remember, I didn't include it today, but I came across a newspaper report where at the end of the day, the last race was what they termed a jumps race. And they were surprised that a lot of people stayed and remained at the race meeting later to see it. So, yeah, thanks.
So, sorry, the question was about during the penal laws where a Catholic couldn't own a horse over £5. That the legislation, as explained by Emma, whether people took it into their own hands, beyond the law.
Yeah, so I mean, my thesis was on the penal laws and a Catholic landowning family who circumvented them. So they did lots of things illegally, like send their children abroad, employ teachers, send their children abroad for an education, employ teachers and send their children to school. Also, they purchased property with a Protestant family who they intermarried with illegally. So it's something that I think the statutes are quite blunt, but I think it's also what you were saying, what happened in reality versus what we either learned about in school. And I mean, I remember being told Catholics couldn't own land, and then I found out, no, they could own land, they just weren't supposed to purchase it, which they did. And I think a lot of the statutes, if you read them, that they can be quite, as you said, quite not specific. We'll say that we would always say, Catholics couldn't own a horse more than £5, and then you actually go and read the statute, and it's a little bit more added in. And yes, I mean, if the Latin family from Morristown Latin or anything to go by, individuals would have taken the law into their own hands. And I think, I mean, if you had what we now wouldn't have now, our thoroughbred horses or the horses like the O'Briens, they were valuable, but they weren't strong enough to, or sufficient substance to carry out war or military tactics, tactics. So I think it was very much focused, and even the statute is better securing Protestants by disarming Papists. It was very much focused on the military perspective rather than actually on sporting or racing side, and they are very different horses. Yeah, I'm sure that people would have taken matters into their own hands. I mean, it's still done today. But, it's just that it's very hard to find, an absolute record. And I think it comes down to tradition and what we definitively know. Okay, cool, thanks.
Any other questions? Billy?
Paul, two briefly. First for Bosco, possibly show a picture of the Winnicon grave. You just outlined where exactly is the graveyard, and for Emma, do we know exactly where the race course was in Balticlass?
Yeah, okay. The first question is for Bosco. It's in relation to Moynihan O'Muinicon's grave in Baltinglass in the cemetery.
Yeah, but it's very easy to find. I actually called into it this morning before I came over here. You just go in the gate. There's a pathway to the left. It's not that one. It's the next pathway to the left. and it's 5 graves in. So.
And the other question was for Emma in relation to the race course in Baltinglass, its location.
So it's reported that it was in the southwest outskirts of the town, beside the River Slaney. So I'm suspecting it is very close to where we are, somewhere around Parkmore. Yeah, you probably know. That was the next thing.
Allendale. Well, the land of Allendale House. Allendale House is on the Kiltegan Road. It's a farmhouse just off the road, but its land goes over onto what you might call the Red Wells road. That big area there, and part of it is now Allendale, the housing estate built on it. So it was quite a large one. Yeah.
Yeah, basically the question is, how many people do you think would have been involved in constructing a monument like this, and where do they live? Well, I suppose the answer is we don't know how many people were involved in the construction of these monuments, but I mean we can hazard a guess that yes, we're talking hundreds of people, over maybe 100 years, maybe more, to construct these monuments. And the evidence for some of them is that they weren't even lived in monuments when they were constructed. And even possibly they were constructed. There's a site in Cork, for example. This is a late Bronze Age site where they constructed it over maybe hundreds of years, and then they burnt it and they didn't occupy it again. So a very deliberate kind of ritual act. Now again, we don't know that was the case for Rathcarron. So yes, you're talking hundreds of people, hundreds of years to construct these sites. Where they were living, we don't think they were living up on the hill. In the Neolithic, people lived in small settlement sites, lived in rectangular houses made of wood. They would have essentially lived in low-lying areas of the landscape, close to rivers, obviously, for obvious reasons. So yes, you're talking around the Baltinglass area. Obviously, we don't have these settlement sites, but we have uncovered a lot of them over the years, in recent years, these road schemes and these infrastructural projects, where they become unearthed.
A supplementary question. Because clearly they had a day job, and this was their weekend celebration or something.
Yes, yeah. There was obviously a reason why this is obviously very important to society to build these large-scale monuments. So it was a very focal point in their lives to build these. And for obvious reasons, I mean, the dead and their ancestors were very important to these people, and we know that. So, I mean, the focal point of the site of Rathcarron is obviously the tomb. So the reasoning is here that they wanted to, worship the dead, by building this large-scale enclosure. And the enclosing element is obviously important to bring people to these sites at particular times in the year to probably celebrate their dead. And this is why we get that, evidence for feasting, evidence for cooking. There was several sherds of the pottery that we found in the ditch that we got analysed to see if there is any animal fats preserved animal fats on the pottery vessels. And we did find evidence for milk-based produce on the vessel itself, still surviving after 6,000 years. So we know that they were heating milk in those vessels. So that's an important thing. And the other important clue is the amount of cereal grains that we found in the ditch. Now you must remember it's a very small trench in a 10-hectare site, and we managed to find pottery and cereals. So that just gives you an idea of, if we investigate the entire circuit, what we would find. So the feasting element is obviously important, and we know it's important from other sites that were excavated in Ireland and Britain, that the possibility is here that people were coming to the site for feasting for particular times and years, and then dumping that material into the ditches and backfilling them. And we know that they backfilled it. It's a very deliberate act that they threw this material into the ditches and then they backfilled it. So it's sort of sealing that event, marking that event by doing that. I hope that's answered your question. Thanks.
Any more questions? That hand went up first.
Alan, are there any plans to do any further excavations of the sites to expand onto the other sites that haven't been looked at before?
Yes, well, I think.
So do I just repeat it? Just in
Is there
case.
is there any other plans to do any further work on these hill forts in terms of excavation and survey? We have 6 out of the 9 now archaeologically investigated and dated. We've done, Dr. James O'Driscoll, I don't know, he did a talk there recently where he's done a massive amount of LiDAR survey, got commissioned across the landscape. This is essentially where a plane goes over the area and shoots lasers down from it, and basically it's a topographical survey of the landscape. So he's done a lot of work, and he's discovered some potential new sites and adding to the group. So James has done a lot of survey, and he's planned to do much more. In terms of excavation, we don't plan on doing any further excavation, essentially because it's very expensive to do this work, and there's not really a lot of funding out there to do it. So that's why our trenches were very focused, and we really had to just aim on dating. We couldn't really do large-scale excavation. So our plan here now is to publish the work as is, as one volume of material, because the publication of this is kind of scattered around the place in several books. So our plan to do, myself, Billy O'Brien and James O'Driscoll, is to publish one book on prehistoric Baltic glass, and we hope to put our results of our excavations in that book. And we hope to do that by next year. So that is the plan. But in terms of excavation over the next few years, I don't think there's any plan as of yet. Yeah, me too.
Was there another hand down there first? Kate.
Yeah, basically, the question was the climate basically on these hills. It's always, when you get to a certain elevation, it's kind of overcast and the cloud comes in very quickly. And when you're in the valley, it's a completely different climate at the same time. And that's a very important point. And it's something that, as archaeologists, we don't think about, because in many cases we're not living in these areas, so we don't appreciate that. But that's absolutely the case. Climate is obviously very important. Another thing is water. If they were living up there, where are they getting their water from? And in terms of Rathcarn, we were thinking a lot of these quarry pits still hold water today. You see from the air, some of our aerial photographs, some of the quarry pits are full of water. So it's a possibility that they were using them as kind of almost cisterns for water. But again, we don't have the evidence that they were actually living up there. But that's an important point, yes, and you're absolutely right.
Yeah, so it's just the looking at the maps of the racecourses in Ireland in the 18th century, and how so many of them are on towns that would have been on the old railway line, as we call it now, because it's closed. The 18th century. I think it's the train weren't there in the 18th century, so I think it was more that the railway went that way due to economy that had developed from the racing, or the economic activities that may have taken place after the races didn't go. So I think that may have guided it. But also interestingly, as you know, one of the railway lines in Grange Con is now a gallops for the horses. It's gone full circle of, railway line is now replaced for equestrian activities. So yeah, okay, thanks.
There was a question over here.
The question is, compare Rathgal with Rathcarn and surrounding hill forts. Rathgal, yes, it's very interesting site. Rathgal would be later in date to Rathcarn. Rathgal would be a typical late Bronze Age Class 2 hill fort, which means that Class 2 is essentially 2 banks and ditches. Rathcarn would be classed previously as a Class 2 late Bronze Age hill fort also, prior to excavation. But we have confirmed now that Rathcarn is a much earlier monument dating to the Neolithic or first farmers, and potentially a site known as a causewayed enclosure. Our excavations didn't confirm whether it was a causeway enclosure. A causeway enclosure essentially means that you have segmented banks and ditches. Now, I know from the air it looks like we have segmented banks and ditches, but we can't confirm if they're original or whether they're related to kind of later cattle coming through the banks and creating gaps in the ditches. And unfortunately, our excavations didn't really focus on those areas to confirm that. So the jury is out whether it's a causeway enclosure. All we can say, it's a hilltop early Neolithic enclosure with comparisons to causeway enclosures like Maharaboy and Donegal, in the north of Ireland. So yes, Rathcorn and Rathgal are very different in terms of date. The function of Rathgal will be very much high status late Bronze Age because of the material that they found during the excavations. Metalwork, evidence for metalworking in the Bronze Age is very rare, and they found that in Rathgal. So it makes that a very high status site. There's also multi-period stuff going on in Rathgal, so very complex. And there's burials found in Rathgal, cremations. So it's very high status. Rathcorn, we can't say too much about what was happening inside the site because we didn't really do much excavations in there. And Rathgal would be very similar to other late Bronze Age hill forts, but it would be the only site where a large amount of excavation happened within the interior, and that's why we know much more about Rathgal than we do other Class 2 hill forts in Ireland. So I hope that covers.
Sorry, Cora, first of all. Cora's question is about gambling and horse racing and placing bets, and whether it was regulated or whether it was just piecemeal and between individuals.
Okay, so initially when we look at racing and how it was developing, that the races were matches. So it was between 2 or 3 individuals, and that was, the prize money was what was wagered in it. Or sometimes it could be that they would wager, bet on the horse. So if the horse lost, the opponent would receive it. I know Edward O'Brien of Dromoland is reported to have actually gambled his entire Dromoland estate on Sean Bui. Well, that won the race, thankfully, so the estate stayed. And there's a temple to Mercury in the Dromoland estate on a hill, and it's said that Sean Bui is actually buried under that. And interestingly, when I was writing a paper on Edward O'Brien on Dromoland for a conference in Cambridge, I visited Dromoland, and if you look from the Temple of Mercury and where he's pointing, it's down to the stable yard in Dromoland. Later on, it wasn't quite this, it would have developed a little bit more. And I think there were, from what I found, there are various types of gambling. So I've not found much on how formalized it was, whether it was bookies or more like what you see in the movies where it's just like a group and someone manages it and they bet that way. But I do know, in addition, there were gambling games, so like your gambling tables, roulette, that also at the races. And there was one report of a gambling table being broken as people were fighting over it. So I haven't yet found evidence of how structured it was and whether there were definitively bookies in attendance, but I do know that there would have been the various types of gambling. I will come back to you on it as I hear.
John, was there somebody else in this area? No, it was just John, yeah.
The question there is, with the concentration of hill forts in Baltinglass, were they all part of the same residency, or were they competing groups at the same time? And yes, that was a theory put forward in the 1990s when the concentration of Baltic glass first came to light, really, you know, in the early 90s by Tom Condit's paper in Archaeology Ireland. And they were two theories put forward, but they were kind of unchallenged, really, at that time. Well, right up to the modern period, because archaeologists didn't really focus their attention on hilltops as excavation sites, because archaeologists want their excavations to be, you know, beside the road. They don't want to be climbing up the hills every morning with shovels and picks. So that's the main reason that that theory lay unchallenged until recent years. But because of the dating evidence that we have now, we're able to say that these hilltop enclosures in Baltic glass were probably not occupied at the same time. There's obviously a degree of overlap. The earliest in the group of the 6 that we've dated seems to be Ratnagree on Tupmill Hill, which seems to date to the Middle Bronze Age, which to date is the earliest Bronze Age hill fort known in Ireland. Usually, I mean, the theory was that they're late Bronze Age, Iron Age, but that one would be the earliest. Then Shrawn, and it would be the next one in line, dating to the kind of late Bronze Age. And that's classified as probably an animal enclosure because it's quite small, there's nothing in the interior. So the theory is that there was probably an animal enclosure related to the other hill fort on the same hill, that they were keeping the animals essentially there. Then Tenorin across the way, which is in forestry at the moment, the dates there are late Bronze Age. So again, there's obviously overlap. Some of the sites might have been occupied at the same time, but the dating doesn't really suggest that. And again, you must remember that these are very small trenches. So it's only dating the construction, it's not dating the occupation of the site. So those are the kind of those are the Bronze Age forts. When you come back and you look at our forts, Rathcorn, Spinans, and Hughestown, all those dates seem to be contemporary. So the suggestion there is that those first forts that were built seem to be all contemporary within the landscape. Now, whether they were the same groups or not, we don't know. But my theory is that they were probably different groups, and there was some sort of competitive display at hand there. Because we have evidence of destruction at Rathcorn with that big fire event, and it seems to be localised to one area of the fort to the northwest, and that's where we have Hughestown, the other large Neolithic enclosure across the hill, which was also comprehensively burnt, the timber palisade. At that site, the entire site was burnt. I didn't talk about that site this morning. So there might be some sort of competition, some warfare, something happening between those two competing forts. Now again, that's pure speculation, but it's a possibility because we have evidence of that, of Neolithic warfare happening in other parts of Ireland at the same time, and in the UK. So that's a popular theory that we're kind of exploring at the moment, that there's some sort of competitive display at hand there between Hughestown and Rathcorn. Spinans, we don't know because there's only one trench that we've dug on Spinans, and the dating there isn't ideal. We really would want to go back and do more work at Spinans to be absolutely sure of when that site was constructed. But yeah, that's all we can say in relation to those forts at the moment. The question, do you think there's any... Yeah, is there any kind of orientation?
In the sense of the way it was built.
Yes, yeah.
Is there any significance to that?
Is there any significance to the type of orientation or possible orientation within the centre of the passage tube? There hasn't been much work done in terms of the orientation of the passage tube, but the likelihood is yes, there probably is some sort of alignment in relation to the tomb and the way it's orientated, particularly the entrance. But that's work that's currently being carried out. I hear Frank Prendergast is the man that does all that kind of work in relation to alignments and tombs. And the passage tomb at Rathcarn is currently being studied as part of a UCD programme with, I forget, Jessica Smith, who's doing work on the earliest passage tombs in Ireland. And the current dating with the tomb at Rathcarn is that it's the earliest tomb in Ireland, based on the dating of human remains from the site. However, I'm not entirely sure about the dating from the site, because the dating was only done quite recently from samples that were left in the museum or housed in the museum for, since the 1930s. And Walsh's excavation wasn't essentially the most scientific, and that wasn't his fault. They were just the methods at the time, but they weren't really methodical, really. And his excavation report is quite short, so I'm not really sure where that dating material came from. But we're very sure that there's two phases of activity to the tomb. One phase is very much contemporary with Ur and closing elements at around 3600 BC, and then there's the more traditional late Bronze Age, late Neolithic passage tomb at around 3000 BC. So there's definitely two phases, but where the dating is coming from, I'm not entirely sure. Is there any significance, the question, between the two basin stone, the basin stone found in the tomb in Rathcarn and Newgrange? No, basically, it's a very common type of stone that was used in these passage tombs for the housing of cremated remains. Now, Rathcarn remains, rare in that sense that it is a passage tomb with the basin stone, and they're not in every passage tomb. So there might be some connection between the two sites, because the stones are very similar, but a lot of the stones are Baltinglass. If anybody's up in the hill, they'll see that they're all naturally like that. They have, they're weathered like that. So it's possible that they're using a stone that's kind of quite weathered like that for the cremated remains. But that's essentially their function. They're basin stones for a cremated body.
Thank you.
Churches to be founded after conversion very often have the place name element Downlock. These churches are frequently found in close proximity to royal centres. Of particular significance in the Baltinglass area is the place name Donamore or Downlock Moor, which still survives as the name of a large parish.
Well, Margaret,
Hi,
it's
Paul.
great that you were able to attend, and a fantastic talk. Thank you very much. Very interesting. Has anyone covered that area before?
When I went to research it, Paul, I found actually no.
That's what I was thinking.
Because I did end up having to pull stuff in from a lot of different places. I mean, it's out there, but you do have to do a bit of searching for it. And I suppose the more contextual stuff, I was drawing on my own sort of knowledge of the period to sort of flesh out.
Put it in context, yes.
To put it in context.
Yeah. No, I when I saw the title, I thought that'll be interesting, and it really was. It was, I knew it hadn't been covered, basically, or I would have heard of it, I thought, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, and it's a great honour to Donal that everyone, all the lecturers agreed, and we had a great turnout. So I'm very happy anyway. Yeah,
it's been a great day. I think I've learned a lot already today, and as I said, I was really honoured to be asked to participate, and very happy to participate.
Nice.
And it is lovely to actually be talking about an area that one knows so well, because I've worked on medieval London, I've worked on medieval Dublin, so it was very nice to bring it back home and to talk about medieval Baltinglass.
Well, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
And in the same breath, I'll also reference his brother, Father Tom, who was instrumental in historical circles in the Diocese of Kildare and Loughlin, in, among other things, helping hoping to form and bring together what's known as the Delaney Archive.
Liam and Eamon, the party's over. I think we're very delighted with the way everything went, and thank you very much for participating. Very interesting final talk.
Well, thank you, Paul, and for inviting us. And I have to say, from back last autumn, and when you produced your program, so well designed, such a fine production and so on, and the variety of speakers, and you've gone from one Iron Age BC to another Iron Age AD, and covered a vast range of periods and localities in West Wicklow, and I think the group appreciated that, the listeners appreciated that.
Yeah, we were sort of concentrating on Baltinglass as the theme, but it was the wider West Wicklow area anyway, but we thought maybe we narrowed it too much, but we got a great response anyway. Of course, you've got West Wicklow connections, but not Baltinglass.
I do indeed, Paul. Thanks indeed. Yeah, strong West Wicklow connection between Hollywood and Dunlavin, and it was great to be able to come here today and just share the Talent Solar presentation with everyone, and it's great. There's so much interest in the history of the railway.
We were delighted that it turned out well as a tribute to Donal. That was the important thing.
Absolutely. And look, I can recall back in the 1980s, and I can recall names like yourselves, the Paul Baker and Mrs. Baker, Irene Mogg, Stanley Johnson, all these people from your early days. And you were really in that first kind of wave of local history groups that began to appear, in my knowledge anyway, around County Kildare and West Wicklow. And where you brought maybe a more how to say popular approach to local history, which then prior to that had been more or less restricted to elite societies. So did great work, but didn't really reach out into the community. And I think the West Wicklow History Society have been one of the heralds of that new approach to local history.
That's nice to be told that. With our new website now, I think we're going to be able to reach more people, So, we're very happy with how things went, and thank you both for the icing on the cake. As somebody said, we kept the best wine to last.
Well, if we were the icing on the cake, you were the chief mixer and in charge of all the ingredients and stirring them together. And I know it's not easy, and the logistics, finding a location, getting all the technical bits set up, never easy. You have to draw on the goodwill of so many people, and such as your repute in the Baltinglass area, Paul, that you have that reservoir of goodwill available to you and able to concentrate it in such a successful way today.
Thank you, but it's not all me. We've got a great team on our committee now, and we're strong again. So, thank you, Liam, and thank you, Eamon.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.